Okay, Megan, I think I have hit the record button yet. One more time.
All right, here we go.
All right. Hello, everyone. We are back. Interestingly enough, this is actually going to be what amounts to a re-record of a previous episode. We got some listener feedback. We wanted to kind of take a step back from what we were doing and almost essentially do a reboot. But before we get into all the gory details, my name is Patrick Cadigan. I am one of the hosts for P2 Transition, or Post-Secondary Transition. Who is my co-host?
And I am Meghan Smallwood, and I am the other host for P2 Transition.
All right, so Megan, as we're coming back, we are looking at what it is that we're doing. All right. And what we decided on was to think of it in terms of a ladder, right? You're starting at the bottom rung. In the transition process, you are walking up the ladder until you are out of school. So where can families start to hear language around the transition process?
Right. So typically, it begins in middle school age. Usually around age 13, 14, you'll start to see those transition pages appear on the IEP, which can be a little scary, can be a little daunting. And I know it's a lot of information to take in at 14 when that transition just to high school is beginning and someone wants to come and talk to you about a transition out of school completely. But it's definitely important to think about and start thinking about. I know our transition teachers will meet with some of the middle school teams to discuss transition pages on the IEP and let them know the important parts at that age. But like I said, in middle school, everyone's just living their day trying to get through it all. But 21 will come before you know it, and you really need to be prepared. So it's an area that gets overlooked a lot. And as they come in as freshmen in ninth grade, parents may not be ready to talk about it still, but hopefully it's sinking in a little more. And it's understandable. Just know that you have those resources at your expense at the school, such as your transition specialist, who are there to help you and will continue to remind you how important it is so that that timeline doesn't sneak up on you and suddenly your child's 21 and everything is just hitting you in the face. I hate to say it that way, but I've seen situations where parents didn't want to think about what's to come and their child turned 20 and it was exiting year and they were playing catch up on a lot of those important milestones that I know we're going to talk about in future podcasts. But it's a lot to take in at one time. So it's better to really try and do it all while you have the time and the resources at your expense.
Well, one of the things that I could comment on being a middle school special education teacher around transition and around the transition process is that where I start, I guess you could say that I start the ball rolling, right? Like what we do is what's referred to as the career preference or the interest inventory, or both essentially. And what that is, I sit down with a student and I ask them just a series of questions like, hey, what are you interested in? Where are you at? Like, what do you like to do? Like kind of, it's almost like building a profile of the student of where they are right then at that time. It's not to say that they're not going to change, obviously, but it is something that we do, and then that information gets then recorded into the IEP. And that, I've always thought of that as a good, is probably the jumping off point, so to speak, for the high school teachers when they do, that transition just into high school. So one of the other things is that I want to throw out there around the career preference and the interest inventory is that you're going to hear a lot of discussion around talking with students or having conversations with students. And I will say that in the past, I have worked with students who are nonverbal. But that doesn't mean that they don't communicate, right? Like what I have, the tools at my disposal would be like a visual interest inventory, where it's essentially asking them the same questions, but it's just through a series of pictures, and then the kids can go and they can, pick out the pictures of the things that they like, or the things that they are interested in, or the things that they've done in the past, and then you use that information as a jumping off point. So that is largely what I think of when I am thinking of transition. And then, of course, by the end of the year, when you are having that transition meeting as they are moving on into high school, that is when the transition specialist may or may not show up. It kind of depends on the school, depends on, the situation, but that's where we are.
And that's great. I'm glad that you mentioned that, because one of the first things I like to do when the freshmen come into high school and I'm updating my database is to look at their transition pages to see what their interests are. And when they have that information that they've met with the case manager or someone close to them in middle school, it really helps me to drive the conversation when I first meet with them, because I don't know them as well as that person did. So I can start, by saying, when you met with Mr. Cadigan last year, I remember you were talking about, you're interested in culinary arts. Does that, jog your memory? Because I know freshman year, when you sit down with the transition specialist and they're like, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? It's hard for them to really think about that.
Yeah. And for myself, one of the most interesting things about working in the community that I live in is that you will see these students years later, right? And so, like I had said before, like one of the things is that, even though I do that career interest inventory now, it doesn't mean that they won't change. Like, it's not one of those things where it's like, oh, okay, it's set in stone, they must do this stuff. No, there's room for there's a lot of room for flexibility, actually. But like you said, it's a jumping off point. It gives everyone one place to start. Now, as we are having this discussion, let's talk about the difference between a certificate track versus a diploma track.
Right. Like you said before, there are students that you'll sit down with who are diploma bound, and you might have that verbal transition interview just discussing interests. And with the transition specialist, they can mention different classes that would meet their graduation requirements that might be of interest to them, such as some of the career academy options. So the diploma-bound students have different pathways that are presented, and they get this information to prepare and hopefully let them experience some of those interests that they have that they've mentioned about a career. So for the students on the certificate track who are not earning a diploma, they'll be earning a certificate when they exit at 21 if they choose to stay that long. There are different work programs that we have in the county that they can participate in so that they are able to practice those experiences vocationally to prepare for whatever they venture to do after 21. Like you mentioned before, when we do those interest inventories, some of our friends might not be able to speak. They might be nonverbal. They might have some limitations. So we have a variety of different interest inventories to present to them to kind of gauge what they like and don't like. And I've had parents ask me, in a meeting, well, these are just pictures of jobs. How can you really tell? I said, well, that's just one way of looking at it. The other data to collect on what they like and don't like is really seeing firsthand if they go to these work sites or if they're working in the building, what jobs did they really excel at? What was their strength? What did they not like? So that's really good information to help us gather too.
We've laid out the foundation in terms of when families can expect to start seeing information around transition. And we've essentially built a podcast around the discussion of this. So let's give it a definition. What is post-secondary transition? What are we talking about?
So while you're in the school system, while your child's in the school system, there's a lot of transitions. They prepare for transition from elementary to middle to high. post-secondary transition is basically that preparation for after they leave high school, when the bus stops coming. We focus on what the goal is for after 21, what they want to do, where you see them, what your goal is for them. And we really work towards preparing them and you on how to get to that goal. There's a lot of different players that go into preparing for that, and it can be overwhelming and it can be hard to keep them all straight. But you have resources at the school who are available to help you navigate through it and find those resources outside of the school building for when you leave, and to help with the research along the way as well. The best thing you can do starting at age 14 is just start researching. Research like crazy. Keep a transition binder at home and print out information that you might find useful down the road, and just keep it all in one place. That way you can always go back to it. And when you get overwhelmed, take a break and walk away. But just know that you've gathered that information.
So Meghan, as we're talking about all this stuff and as we're throwing around all these words and, everything, one question that I have, what do you think is the biggest challenge for families when it comes to transition?
I think really just being out there on your own is the biggest challenge for families, because for so long through the school system, they've had these wonderful supports of special educators, related service providers, the transition specialists once they get to high school. They've had all these people surrounding them along the way to give recommendations and report on progress and help them figure things out. And then you hit 21 and you have to say goodbye to them all. So, I experienced this with my own sister, who, as I mentioned in the first podcast, has a disability, and my mom would constantly be fighting to advocate things for her. And I think just her being that advocate was so crucial to the success that she's had. And I just really strongly recommend every parent listening, just be that advocate. Start now. Don't be afraid to ask any questions about the process until you understand it fully. And I've had parents who have said to me, can we meet monthly? Can we go over this again? I'm sorry, I still don't understand. And I'm like, absolutely. Like, I want you to understand because you have me here now to explain it to you, and then unfortunately I go away. So I want you to understand the ins and outs. And it can be hard. You're faced with these new agencies who unfortunately might not have the empathy that the school system did, may not respond as quickly. So you really have to be on top of them. And then you have different agencies and organizations who may not be user-friendly and don't communicate. So if you're getting services from one person and also you have the second agency, they don't communicate, then you're the middleman. So just keeping track of it all and making sure everyone is doing what they're supposed to be doing is crucial. And that's, like I said, a huge challenge, and just making sure that you stay on top of it. It really helps the whole transition process.
And along the lines of helping the transition process, what we have essentially done, although I will largely credit Meghan for this, but what we did is that we put together a website, right? www.postsecondary-transition.com. And it is essentially designed and intended to be a repository for many of the things that you are going to come across in your journey.
And I think Patrick just did a phenomenal job about making it user-friendly and so aesthetically pleasing. So there's a great way of navigating through it.
We have information for diploma track students. We have calendars or calendar resources. We have a link to the podcast. We even have a contact page. There's information. There's so much information in there. DDA, doors, healthcare, housing information. And don't get us wrong, the intention for the podcast, as we've always talked about, is that we're going to try to come back and explain some of these topics more in depth. but we will always refer it back to the website. So if there's something you need to know, or if you're looking for a particular resource, please visit our website. Go through it. If there's something that you're not seeing, let us know. This is not a static project for us. This is something that we are constantly receiving feedback on. We're constantly receiving new and updated information. And so we're having to go back in and we're having to make changes. And like Meghan said, we're trying to make it as easy and user-friendly as possible. Yeah, we will never we will never be sad about feedback. We've already gotten some feedback on some of the things that we have done and we've talked about. Again, it was actually one of the reasons why we came back and we felt like we needed to re-record one of our earliest episodes. One, not only for the better audio quality, but for two, just to again, thinking of it in terms of a ladder, starting at the bottom and working our way up. So we're going to be doing more episodes like that. Information 101 podcasts, if you will, and they'll be building on each other. But if there is a specific topic that you would like us to discuss, please drop us a link. We are always listening. All right, Miss Meghan. Well, I think that we have covered the majority of the topics. It's interesting because I have to say, I actually think it was harder to go back and to re-record the episode than it would be to just kind of talk off the cuff like we have in the beginning. So
I think so too, because I wanted to make sure everything that we discussed was still covered, and then some.
And then some. All right. But we have come to an end on this particular episode. We will visit you guys again. Please, please, please do not forget to follow and subscribe to our podcast. If there are families or friends that you think would benefit from the information that we are sharing, please
spread the word.
All right. So this episode is done. We are going to sign off. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.